Warning: the following program contains subject matter that may be disturbing to some audiences. Viewer discretion advised. You're listening to Descent to Depravity, where we investigate the darkest corners of the human psyche, one chilling story at a time.
Say it clear.
You are the master that pleases me to serve you. You are the master that pleases me to serve you.
Stop up.
You are the master that pleases me to serve you.
You just get your down like I said. You sorry?
Yes.
You sorry about what?
Everything.
Jumping in the car with a motherfucker you don't know?
Yes.
You sorry?
Yes.
You want to say something to your kids?
Mama, sorry.
Who raising your kids?
Me and my mama, Dad.
You ain't raising shit. You on here in your back smoking crack. Number one. First was 19 years old. Name,
They found the first tape in a locked metal cabinet, a VHS cassette labeled Your Wedding Day. When investigators pressed play, the room filled with the sound of a woman begging for her life. A wooden support beam, a leather belt tightening around her neck, a male voice apathetically saying, "First kill, 19 years old." Detectives watched in silence. Some turned away, one walked out. The chief of police mandated all officers who watched the footage to attend counseling services. What they didn't know yet was that the man behind the camera had killed before and would kill again. They didn't know that he chose women the world ignored, that he disposed of them along highways like discarded trash bags, or that he believed none of them mattered enough for anyone to notice. But they noticed. And when he finally made his one mistake, one map printed from one website at one deadly moment, the facade he'd built began to crumble, and the monster behind it stepped into the light. This is the investigation he tried to erase. This is the truth he tried to take to the grave. On paper, Maury Travis's childhood looks almost offensively ordinary. He was born October 25th, 1965, in St. Louis, Missouri, to Michael and Sandra Travis. No burned-out tenement, no headline-grabbing abuse case, just a black family trying to move upward in a city already starting to fracture along class and racial lines. His earliest memories formed in Carr Square Village, a public housing complex north of downtown. Brick buildings stood close together, children played in the courtyards, and the sound of sirens was just part of the neighborhood soundtrack. To the people who lived there, it was home. To a boy like Maury, it was also a lesson. You survived by keeping your head down and your business to yourself. When he was about 10, his parents moved him out of the city's core and into the suburbs, buying a small ranch house on Ford Drive in Ferguson. It was the type of place that could disappear into any Midwestern subdivision. Low roofline, trimmed lawn, a single tree out front. Neighbors later struggled to remember the family at all. They recalled a quiet boy who would sometimes mow a lawn, maybe ride his bike down the street, but nothing that stuck. Even as a child, Travis learned how to occupy space without drawing attention. Sometime in the late 1970s, his parents split up. His father faded into the background. Maury stayed in the house with his mother, Sandra. She worked long hours, kept the place orderly, and pushed him through school. Teachers remembered her as involved, strict but polite when she came in for conferences. If there was turmoil inside the home, it never spilled into the records. He attended local schools in North St. Louis County, McClure North, and later another area high school, keeping to himself in hallways filled with louder boys who wanted attention. He was not the class clown or the budding athlete. He was the kid you forgot about as soon as he walked past. Travis himself, in the last days of his life, insisted that something inside him had already gone wrong by then. In the suicide note he wrote to his mother from jail, he confessed nothing about the murders, but he did describe his mind. "I've been sick for a long time. Sick in the head, since I was about 14. I don't know why. I was just sick. I've never felt normal or happy at any time in my life. It is one of the only glimpses we get of how he framed his adolescence. A private narrative of inner sickness that no one around him could see or verify. Detectives who dug through his past after his arrest found no documented history of childhood abuse, no hospitalizations for mental illness, no juvenile record of violent outbursts. Friends from those years didn't come forward with stories of animal torture or sadistic games. Instead, they described someone shy, awkward, occasionally sullen, but nothing more. After high school, Travis drifted into adulthood the same way he had moved through adolescence, quietly, almost imperceptibly. He left Missouri to attend Morris Brown College for a time, then returned home and slipped into a series of jobs that allowed him to stay on the periphery of people's attention. Those who crossed paths with him in these years described him the same way his teachers once had: polite, distant, and hard to read. In the end, that may have been his greatest advantage. Before he ever lured a woman into his basement, Maury Travis had already mastered the most important skill a serial predator can have in a community: the ability to look like no one at all. When he returned to Missouri in the late 1980s, something had already shifted beneath the surface. He had developed a cocaine addiction, the kind that doesn't take over in a single night but seeps into a person slowly, tightening around whatever loneliness or instability they already carry. By 1987, that addiction was eating through his savings and pushing him into darker territory. His addiction worsened. By 1988, he was burning through more money than he could earn. Rather than letting the facade crack, Travis found a different route: a string of robberies, almost always at shoe stores, usually with a toy gun or simulated weapon. Reports from the time paint him not as a reckless armed criminal, but as a strange, almost timid robber, quiet, controlled, not inclined to violence. He was caught in January 1989 after multiple holdups and pleaded guilty to federal and state charges. A sitting congressman even wrote a letter on his behalf, asking the court for leniency based on Travis's prior volunteer work and apparent potential. It didn't work. He was sentenced to 15 years in the Missouri Department of Corrections. By 1994, after serving roughly 5 years, he was paroled. He walked out of prison without a single write-up for violence, without any incident suggesting the brutality he would one day unleash. To the parole board, he looked like a model inmate. Back in Ferguson, he slipped easily back into anonymity. He worked as a waiter at a well-known St. Louis restaurant near Lafayette Square. Co-workers remembered him as reserved, intense at times, but professional and polite. Regular customers tipped him well. He knew how to move around people without disturbing them, but the cracks were still there. In 1998, he was arrested for cocaine possession and received probation. In 1999, he was picked up for a DWI. Each of these incidents shows a man whose inner world was unraveling again, even as he maintained a convincing outward calm. What developed during these years was something far more dangerous: the confidence that he could hide anything. He had hidden his addiction. He had hidden his robberies behind a mask of normalcy. He had hidden his years in prison. He had hidden the dark impulses that would soon find their outlet. By the time he entered the year 2000, Maury Travis was outwardly stable, employed, quiet, self-contained. But beneath that calm surface, the part of him he called sick since I was 14 had finally begun to take shape, and he was preparing to feed it. Somewhere between 1999 and 2001, long before detectives knew his name, Travis abducted a woman in St. Louis. The victim later told police he picked her up, took her to a location she couldn't identify, tied her, beat her, repeatedly sexually assaulted her, and held her captive for hours. She escaped, barefoot, terrified, and called 911 from a payphone. Her mother confirmed her injuries. She identified Maury Travis as the attacker. But the police report written afterward appeared to dismiss the allegations. The detective noted the woman was a drug user. He questioned her credibility. He asked her to return to the station and sign paperwork if she wanted to press charges. She never came back, terrified he would find her again. And the case was quietly shelved. Years later, after Travis's arrest, that same victim said she recognized him on the news immediately. She had survived a man the police didn't believe existed. A second woman survived Travis as well, though she would never be able to speak coherently about what happened. She She was found severely beaten and brain damaged after fleeing an unknown assailant. When investigators finally reviewed Travis's videotapes, they believed she was one of the women on the recordings. Tied, tortured, begging. She had escaped his basement, but the damage he inflicted meant she would never testify. He began killing the same way he lived his life. Quietly, without fanfare, without leaving anything behind that spoke above a whisper. But the pattern was unmistakable once investigators finally stepped back far enough to see it. One by one, black women working the margins of St. Louis disappeared. Women addicted, impoverished, alone, and targeted precisely because they occupied a place he believed no one cared to look. Between July 2000 and May 2002, Maury Travis hunted them with methodical patience, moving across city lines, state lines, and jurisdictions, dumping bodies in places where nature and time could erase what he had done. He left no obvious signatures at first, only the quiet consistency of strangulation, body disposal, and rural isolation. It was not until the killings escalated, and until he wanted recognition, that the facade cracked. Mary Shields, July 31, 2000, East St. Louis, Illinois. Mary Shields was 61 years old, older than most of his later victims, and known to walk the East St. Louis tracks near 15th Street. When her body was found on July 31, 2000, wrapped in a green trash bag, it was already badly decomposed. The medical examiner determined she had been strangled. At the time, investigators weren't thinking this was the work of a serial killer. It looked like another tragic death in a city plagued by violence. No one connected it to a serial predator. But the manner of disposal, the bag, the roadside placement, the attempt to reduce trace evidence would become familiar. Alicia Greenwade, April 1, 2001, Washington Park, Illinois. 34-year-old Alicia Greenwade vanished from the St. Louis sex trade circuit sometime in late March 2001. On April 1st, her body appeared near Interstate 64, close to Washington Park. She was partially wrapped in plastic, left near an isolated roadway. The scene gave investigators their first real physical clue: a Bridgestone Potenza tire print in the soft earth near her body. This tread pattern would later match one of the two vehicles Travis drove. Her cause of death: strangulation. Her connection to Travis, later confirmed by tire evidence and the discovery of her presence on his videotapes. She would become one of the two victims named in the federal kidnapping indictment filed against him. Cassandra Walker, March 24, 2001. Near Washington Park, I-64 corridor. Just 19, Cassandra Walker was barely an adult. She disappeared from St. Louis in March 2001, and her body was found on March 24th, dumped near a roadside close to where Greenwade would later be found. In Travis's basement tapes, the ones police would later call pure evil, a young woman appears chained to a support post. Travis stands behind her, tightening a belt around her neck. Her hands are bound. She struggles, gasps, collapses. He says on camera, "This is first kill, number one. First kill was 19 years old." Investigators and Cassandra's family believe those words were about her. Her family had described her as having got off on the wrong track for a minute, but she was loved, she was cared for, and she had people waiting for her to come home. She never did. Teresa Wilson, May 15, 2001. West Alton, Missouri. Teresa Wilson's body was discovered along Highway 67, near an on-ramp in West Alton, on May 15, 2001. She was nude, her body exposed to the elements, and she had been dead for approximately 5 days. Nothing at the scene gave investigators a name. No one had reported her missing. A year later, the Post-Dispatch ran a profile on her struggles, her addiction, her attempts to survive the St. Louis streets. That article would provoke the killer himself to write a letter demanding more stories, mocking her death, and directing police to another body. Teresa Wilson became the catalyst that forced Maury Travis into the light. Betty James, May 23, 2001, St. Louis, Missouri. Betty James, 46, was found along a St. Louis roadside in late May 2001. Betty appears alive in one of Travis's videotapes. She is restrained, terrified, pleading. Her presence on that tape, combined with the tire evidence and blood found in the basement, made her one of the two victims in the federal kidnapping indictment. Her family believed she had accepted a ride from someone who looked like he had money. Travis cultivated this exact illusion. Verona Ronnie Thompson, June 29, 2001. West Alton, Missouri. On June 29, 2001, the body of Verona Thompson, 36, was discovered less than 20 feet from where Teresa Wilson had been found. Same highway, same dumping pattern, same cause of death, strangulation. Yvonne Cruz, August 25, 2001, East St. Louis, Illinois. Yvonne Cruz was found near the I-64 corridor in August 2001. Police recovered DNA from her body belonging to an unknown male, later matched to Travis through the soda can he drank during questioning. Cruz's murder finally pushed East St. Louis police to consider the possibility of a serial predator targeting black women across jurisdictions. Still, without a suspect or consistent crime scene signatures, they were hunting a ghost. Brenda Beasley, October 8, 2001. East St. Louis, Illinois. 33-year-old Brenda Beasley was discovered near Converse Avenue on October 8, 2001. Her body showed evidence of either blunt force trauma or strangulation. Accounts differ based on decomposition stage, but the most damning link came later. DNA on a spoon in Travis's kitchen matched her. Blood in the basement matched her. And a woman matching her appearance is shown on his tapes. Alive, crying, chained, begging. Her death solidified the case's trajectory. The same man was killing across both states. Between January and May of 2002, 4 additional Jane Does were found. January 30th, 2002, near Mascoutah, Illinois. March 11th, 2002, near Highland, Illinois. March 28th, 2002, near Columbia, Illinois. May 25th, 2002, near West Alton, Missouri, all black women. They were all believed to be prostitutes. Travis had hidden himself behind the anonymity of women the world ignored. He had succeeded, until an article about one of his victims provoked him into stepping forward. On May 19, 2002, St. Louis Post-Dispatch reporter Bill Smith published a long, compassionate profile on Teresa Wilson. The piece refused to treat her as another roadside casualty. Instead, it rebuilt her story from the fragments addiction and poverty had left behind. The narrative gave Teresa dignity, and to a man like Travis, it was an unforgivable offense. It pulled her out of the shadows he operated within. 4 days later, an envelope appeared on Smith's desk. The return address read, Thraldom, 325-331 Lafayette Street, New York, NY 112. The name 222 belonged to a bondage website. The address was fake. The postmark, however, came from St. Louis. Inside, Smith found a single sheet of paper printed in red ink using a decorative script font. The message was chilling in its sarcasm and contempt. Dear Bill, nice sob story about Teresa Wilson, it began. The writer demanded a similar article about another victim, Alicia Greenwade. He then offered directions to number 17, adding that if Smith printed another story in the Sunday edition, he would reveal many others. Attached to the letter was a trimmed computer printout of a map. Someone had cut off the website heading. A small X marked a spot near the intersection of Highway 67 and the St. Charles Street on-ramp in West Alton, just miles from where Teresa Wilson's body had been found. Smith gave the letter to police immediately, and officers arranged a search of the area the killer had marked. Within the 50-yard radius he specified, they found a skull, scattered bones, and the decomposed remains of a woman who still has not been identified. The killer's message was real. His taunt was deliberate. The only clue he left behind was the map. At first glance, it seemed hopeless. There were no fingerprints on the letter or envelope, no saliva on the stamp, no DNA on the paper. The map itself had been trimmed so precisely that even the website identifying information was gone. But one cybercrimes investigator with the Illinois State Police believed the map could still be traced. He spent hours comparing it against every commercial mapping product he knew: MapQuest, Rand McNally, DeLorme, even CD-ROM map programs sold in the late 1990s. Finally, he found an exact match. The map came from Expedia.com, which at the time used Microsoft's mapping software. Because the layout, pixel structure, and rendering were proprietary, investigators realized something extraordinary. Only one website in the world produced that specific format. That meant the map could potentially be traced to the user who generated it. Federal agents subpoenaed Expedia's server logs. In response, the company provided a list of all the IP addresses that had accessed that exact West Alton location between May 19th, the day Teresa's profile ran, and May 21st, the date stamped on the envelope. There was only one. One search, one user, one digital fingerprint. The IP address, 65.227.106.78, belonged to UUNet, an internet service provider. When agents subpoenaed UUNet for subscriber information, they were directed to a modest ranch home in the 1000 block of Ford Drive in Ferguson, Missouri. The account associated with that address belonged to MSN Maury Travis. Detectives began 24-hour surveillance on the house. It belonged to Travis's mother, Sandra, but investigators quickly concluded that Maury himself was the primary resident. They observed his vehicle, his movements, and the fact that the house's basement windows were always dark. They waited until the warrant was ready. On June 7, 2002, St. Louis Metropolitan Police Detective Sergeant Tim Sachs approached the front door with FBI agents and officers from multiple jurisdictions behind him. When Travis opened the door, shirtless, irritated, and half awake, he snapped, "It's 7 o'clock in the morning," Sachs replied evenly. "You're right, and we're serving a federal search warrant." Travis asked why they were there. Sachs answered, "You know why we're here." Travis lowered his head and nodded. When the door opened on Ford Drive that morning, Maury Travis stood before the investigators half-dressed, irritably tugging on clothing as if they were an inconvenience. Minutes earlier, he had been asleep. Now he was being pulled into the center of a nightmare he had spent years constructing, and believed he had expertly concealed. They gathered in the living room, a quiet, unremarkable space Travis had fashioned into a kind of conversation pit. Sofas arranged around a small coffee table, a neutral-colored carpet, ordinary lamps, a room that, on its surface, radiated harmlessness. Investigators would later say it was a very normal living room in a very normal house, but the basement beneath it was anything but normal. The basement was a house of torture. There were bloodstains on the carpet, the walls, and even the ceiling. Women's shoes, underwear, wigs, and personal items littered the room. A stun gun lay on a shelf. A locked file cabinet contained belts, rope, tape, gloves, and other restraints. Behind another panel, investigators found videotapes of women being tortured, beat, sexually assaulted, and killed. Enough to later require mandatory counseling for every detective who viewed them. Inside the basement sat the computer that had accessed the map. Forensic examiners later recovered deleted drafts of the letter Travis had mailed to Bill Smith. As officers in the basement cataloged evidence, Travis, Detective Sergeant Tim Sachs of the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department, an FBI profiler, an expert in the psychology and interrogation of serial killers, and two additional investigators, Roy Douglas and Illinois State Police Special Agent James Walker, sat in the family room. As they settled in, Travis's calico cat stretched lazily and wandered into the room. It brushed against chairs, moved from investigator to investigator, even attempted to climb onto a lap or two. Each time someone reached out to stroke its fur, Travis tensed. His body stiffened. He leaned forward in his seat. He didn't appreciate it at all, Sachs later said. For a man who had spent years exerting absolute dominance over his victims, watching someone else touch something he considered his seemed intolerable. At one point, he abruptly lifted the cat, placed it beside him, and kept it shielded from the investigators. Out of reach, as though he were reclaiming control of the only innocent thing in the house. For the next 2 hours, the investigators attempted to ease into conversation. They tried small talk. They tried casual questions. They tried indirect angles into his past. But each attempt slid off him like water on glass. They asked him where he grew up. He answered with another question. "Where did you grow up?" They asked him what he did as a child. "Nothing," he answered flatly. "Went to school, what did you do?" Sachs would later say Travis redirected everything, every question, every attempt at insight, every push toward his past. It wasn't verbal sparring. It was exertion of power. He wanted to be in control, Sachs said. Not once did he ask why they were there. Not once did he ask what they were looking for. Not once did he ask what had led investigators to his door. He showed no fear. He showed no curiosity. He showed no guilt. He sat like a man playing a game that only he knew the rules to. Hours later, at police headquarters, Travis was moved into a small interrogation room. Sachs sat across from him again, this time separated from the distractions of home, the cat, the familiar scenery. Now it was just the two of them, and the profiler had given Sachs one directive: find the crack in Maury Travis's shell. The interview stretched nearly 3 hours, then 5, then 8. Sachs kept trying to pull Travis toward the truth of who he was and what he had done, but Travis responded like a man picking apart each question for weakness. He deflected, he inverted, he redirected. Sachs asked about girlfriends. Travis said yes, he had dated. Sachs asked about prostitutes. Again, yes, he had paid for them. Sachs asked whether he had been abused as a child. No, Travis said. Then he threw the question back with unsettling speed. How about you? At one point, Sachs tried a psychological approach used in profiling, asking Travis whether violent behavior was something a person was born with or learned. Travis leaned back, eyes flat, voice stripped of emotion. He said I would never understand, Sachs recalled. He said he was born like this. He said he'd been like this as long as he could remember. No trauma, no trigger, no turning point, just darkness, starting in childhood, lingering, growing. Throughout the questioning, Sachs noticed something else. Travis showed genuine affection for only one person, his mother. When she came up, his tone shifted almost imperceptibly. He seemed fond of her, protective, a son rather than a predator. But even that human flicker never grew into remorse. Investigators watched closely. Every twitch, every change in breathing, every subtle cue that might signal regret. They saw nothing, absolutely none, Sachs would later say. No guilt, no remorse. As the evidence mounted, tape after tape, blood sample after blood sample, Travis began tapping his fingers on the table. It was the only visible sign that the gravity of the moment was registering. Still, he refused to budge. When investigators finally told him, "You know what we found in your basement," Travis didn't flinch. "Yeah," he replied. "I knew you'd find it." There was no shock, no confusion, no denial, just a quiet acknowledgement that the facade had collapsed. A few times, the enormity of the situation seemed to catch up to him, and he dropped his head. "I'm toast," he muttered once. After nearly 8 hours, Sachs stepped out, allowing investigators Douglas and Walker to take over. Their interrogation style was sharper, more direct, more confrontational. They had produced results in the past with other suspects. Their approach worked quickly, perhaps too quickly. Only 19 minutes into their session, Travis's demeanor changed. His walls went back up. His tone hardened. He stopped answering questions and leaned forward with a final declaration. "I'm not going back to prison." Then, with a chilling calmness, he requested an attorney. The interview ended. So did their chance at a confession. After the interrogation, after the DNA match, after investigators uncovered the tapes, the ropes, the blood, and the outlines of a dungeon he hadn't yet completed, Maury Travis was transferred to the St. Louis County Justice Center in Clayton. Federal authorities held him there under contract as they prepared the charges, 2 federal counts of kidnapping resulting in death, with additional homicide charges pending from multiple jurisdictions on both sides of the river. They placed him on 24-hour suicide watch. They believed he was dangerous, but not to himself. Dangerous in the sense that he held answers no one else had. Answers that families needed. Answers that the FBI wanted preserved for training future agents. Answers that investigators hoped would lead them to the women who had never been found. But Travis had no intention of giving anything to anyone. Inside the jail, his cell was simple. A metal toilet and sink unit, a bed bolted to the floor, concrete walls, and an air vent positioned high above the toilet. A small observation window allowed officers to check on him every 15 minutes, as required for suicide watch inmates. In that setting, sterile, controlled, monitored, no one expected him to find an escape. But escape was the one thing he had always been good at. In the evening hours of June 10, 2002, only 3 days after his arrest, the system around him faltered. Officers assigned to monitor him missed not 1, but 2 scheduled checks. Whether it was complacency, exhaustion, distraction, or negligence, no one noticed that for nearly 45 minutes, Travis was left alone and unseen. It was enough time. Later, investigative reconstructions revealed what happened next. Travis tore a long strip from his bedsheet, twisting it into a rope with cold, methodical quiet. He threaded the fabric through the ventilation grate above the toilet. The vent was narrow, but it offered a solid anchoring point. He pulled the sheet down into a loop, tightening it into a noose. Then, in a final act of absolute, deliberate control, he bound his own hands behind his back. Investigators would later say he did this to prevent the reflex to save himself, a recognition of how strong the instinct to survive can be, even in a man who believed himself beyond redemption. When officers eventually returned to the observation window, they saw his body hanging beside the bed, suspended from the vent, his feet slightly off the floor. A pillowcase had been pulled over his head. He had already grown cold. On the bed was a handwritten letter addressed to his mother. It read like the final monologue of a man determined to write his own ending. "Dear Mom, I'm sorry for the pain this has caused you and the family. My death seems to be the only way out and a fast end to all the publicity. You were the best mother a man can have. But I've been sick for a long time, sick in the head, since I was about 14. I don't know why. I was just sick. I've never felt normal or happy at any time in my life. Think about the life I lead and what's ahead of me. This seems the best solution for all involved, especially me, because I won't spend the rest of my life locked up or worse. Let them kill me with a needle. Tell Grandma, Marina, James, and everybody I loved them dearly. I love you the most, but you know that. Forever your son, Toby Travis." He confessed nothing in the note. Not the murders, not the torture, not the number of women he claimed in his letter to the newspaper. He offered closure to no one except himself. The letter was not remorseful. It was self-explanatory, self-protective, and ultimately self-serving, just like the man who wrote it. For investigators, his death was a catastrophe. Detective Sergeant Sachs said later, "He had 1,000,000 questions. 1,000,001 questions, and he took every answer with him." His suicide ended the possibility of recovering the 5 additional victims he claimed, clarifying the identities of the women seen on the tapes, identifying the Jane Does found in 2002, learning whether he killed elsewhere before the year 2000, understanding the psychology of a predator who had left almost no trace of himself in childhood or adolescence. Travis died exactly as he lived, on his own terms, withholding everything, leaving behind only horror, unanswered questions, and the disturbing reality that the full story of his crimes is buried forever inside the mind of a man who refused to give investigators even a final word. The Ford Drive house has long since been rented to new tenants. Children ride bicycles past the quiet ranch. Neighbors mow their lawns without knowing, or without wanting to know, what happened beneath the floorboards. The basement has been renovated. The blood is gone. The walls have been painted. But the history is permanent. The women he killed lived on the margins, but their stories did not end in obscurity. Each remains a name in a file, a victim in a case, a mother, a daughter, a sister whose life was stolen by a man who believed no one would ever fight for them. In death, they gained the voice he tried so hard to silence. And Maury Travis, who built a basement for torture and planned to build cells for captivity, who mocked his victims and taunted the press, who thought he was smarter than the world around him, left this life the same way he lived it, quietly, secretly, and with a final act of control. That basement remains the only place where the truth of what he did was ever fully known, and it died with him.